Howdy, howdy. Chris here, back in the garage today working on this Chevy truck fender. Now, in the last episode, if you caught that, we started the repairs by glue pulling this fender and getting most of that dent out. Then we went around with a hammer and dolly, straightened out some of those wavy areas and those imperfections, and then we hooked up the G90E and did our final pulls on it, and this is what we ended up with. Started to come out really nice. Today is all about body filler. I'm going to share with you how to mix, apply, and block sand body filler, so let's get into it.
Okay, we got some upol lightweight filler here. This upol lightweight gold.
One thing I want to recommend if you're just starting out with body filler, get yourself a quality body filler. It doesn't have to be the most expensive, but do not buy the cheapest filler out there. It's going to be very difficult to sand, and it's going to cause a lot of frustration.
We want to fold this in so it's all one uniform color. Press out any air. Try and avoid stirring it. If you stir it, you can introduce air to the filler, and that's going to cause pinholes. So we're just going to put one thin coat over this, and then we'll block it out and see where we're at. We may have to put another coat on, but all we're trying to do is fill those low areas, those waves, so we don't have a ton of filler on this. We're just going to get a little bit on our spreader here. I'm just going to start at the top. I'm going to press it in to start with.
So all this metal and the surrounding paint was prepared for filler with 80 grit sandpaper on an orbital sander. And we are applying the filler over the edge of the paint. You can do that, but you always want to check your technical data sheet for the product you're using. Also, you want to make sure you have a clean surface before you start applying your filler. I like to use isopropyl alcohol, but you could also use automotive prep solvent. I'll try to leave links to the products I'm using, like the prep solvent, the isopropyl alcohol, and this body filler here. I do like this body filler. It's not super expensive, but it works really well, and it sands very easy.
Now I'm going to ease up on the pressure a little bit.
So the first coat, we pressed it into the metal, but on the second coat, we want to ease up on the pressure and allow that filler to fill those low areas. If you press too hard, you're going to push it out of those low areas.
We'll let that dry, and then we'll block it out, see where we're at. So I've got some 80 grit on this medium-sized block. We're just going to start this way and work our way over. You want to block it in an X pattern. We're going to block it in sections. I don't want my scratches to go too far past the bodywork.
There's a lot of different ways to start the blocking process. Some guys like to use a coarse paper like a 36 grit just to knock the roughness down on the filler, and then others like to use a DA. Because this is such thin filler, I'm just going to start out with 80 grit. This filler sands really easy, so it doesn't really take any extra time to start with 80. And then I don't have to remove those deeper 36 grit scratches. There's nothing wrong with any of those techniques. It's just finding what works for you. But if you're starting out, I would start with 80 grit. Use a quality body filler. You don't want something that's rock hard to sand. You want something that sands nice and easy. It'll eliminate a lot of frustration.
We finished our initial blocking. We did break through into bare metal in some areas. So I did have to knock down a section here. So I had to knock down this metal here, so I used my flat spoon and knocked that down. We've got a couple little low areas here and here. Now, I did break through into bare metal here, but this is not low. This section right here is low. So one thing you gotta determine, when you break through into bare metal, what you need to determine is that metal higher than the rest of the fender, or is the area around it low? In this case, the area around it is low. So we're gonna put some filler right in here. We're gonna cover this whole fender, but we wanna make sure we get some filler right in there so we can build this up just a little bit. Once I have that, I wanna get the low areas, so I'm gonna fill these low areas here. And then I'm going to put a coat over this whole section. Now I'm not pressing really hard here because I want to spread it evenly over this whole repair area. I don't want to push the filler out I'm going to put a little right over this edge here so we can transition it into the rest of this fender.
Next, we're going to let this dry. It usually takes about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll block sand this out with 80 grit. I'll share with you how to use a guide coat to find your high and low areas, and then we'll talk about using polyester glazing putty and why you might want to do that. So Darius went ahead and applied a guide coat to this fender, and then he started in the front section, worked his way back, and blocked this fender out. We are still using 80 grit sandpaper to block this.
So we got most of this blocked out. It looks really good over here. So Darius is blocking this section here. He's using this flexible block so he can shape it to the contours of the fender. But he's going to finish blocking this out. Then we're going to put some glazing putty over it. I'll share with you how we do that and what that process looks like.
Darius is using a flexible block because this fender has a contour to it, a natural contour, and we want to make sure that block's going to lay flat on that panel. If your block is teetering on the panel, then you're not going to get a true block and you're not going to get it truly straight. So just make sure you're using the correct block for the situation you're in. Now he is going to apply a guide coat here. This is just a charcoal based guide coat that's going to show his low areas. So as he blocks over it, as the panel's blocking straight, it'll leave that guide coat in those low areas. So this is an easy way to check your work to make sure it's straight. Now guide coat doesn't always show everything, so you want to start developing a feel with your hand. Now you run your hand quickly across the panel and you can feel any high or low areas or imperfections.
Okay, this is the glazing putty we're going to use. It's USC Icing. This is just a finishing putty. It's going to fill any imperfections. So we've got a few little pinholes here, a few little waves. We're going to correct it with this. So I just put some on here. We've got our hardener here. We're going to mix it up till it's all one uniform color, and then we'll lay it over this whole repair area. This stuff is really thin. It sands easy. It's just kind of an insurance policy to fill any deeper scratches that we might have missed or any pinholes. So I'm just getting a little bit on my spreader here, and I'll press it in. See how smooth it is, nice and smooth. I'll put a real thin coat over here.
Okay, so I'm going to block this out with 180 grit sandpaper. I am still using this flexible block because this has a natural contour. And I'm going to use both hands at times to make sure I have some even pressure on it. We're not putting a lot of pressure on it. We're letting the sandpaper do the work. But I want to make sure it's laying flat on that panel. Once I've went ahead and knocked off the roughness of this icing with the 180 grit sandpaper, we're going to go ahead and add a guide coat. Again, we'll block sand that out with 180. Make sure we've removed any of those deep scratches or imperfections. And then I will block it with 320 grit sandpaper before we add our primer. I did switch over to a smaller block, and I blocked it in sections from the rear of the fender to the front. It's going to help me with this contour in the front of this fender. And I also want to feel over it as I block, make sure I'm not feeling any waves. If I feel some waves, I can block those out a little bit. So if I feel any little high spots, I can concentrate on blocking that high spot down to meet the rest of the panel. Now this is all in filler. We're not going to run into any bare metal here or anything. We're just straightening out this glazing putty. So now I switched over to this adjustable long block. I can adjust this to meet the contour of the fender. Really handy little tool, but this way I get a longer stroke over this fender. I cover more surface area. It's going to help me get this straight. So here you can see I'm adjusting the contour of this block. It's a pretty interesting tool. I like it. If you want to check it out, I will leave a link in the description so you can take a look at it. So now I'm going to use an orbital sander, and I'm going to sand the perimeter with 320 grit sandpaper, and I'm using an interface pad, which is a soft foam pad that's going to move with the contours of the panel. It's going to keep you from digging into your filler. So I'm going to run over this filler with 320, try and remove some of those 180 grit scratches. So we got a little low spot at the top of this fender, so I'm going to have Darius fill it with some icing. We're just going to fill that spot only. The rest of this fender is ready to go, and then we'll move on to the primer. So Darius just filled a low spot here. There's a low spot right here that we're going to block out. So he's going to block that out now with 180. And then we'll be pretty much ready to primer this. Okay, Darius got this all blocked out. So now it's ready for primer. He's going to go ahead and mask it off, and then we're going to apply 2 coats of 2K urethane primer. We're using the upol primer. We'll share all that with you and how to paint this truck in the next episode. Listen, I appreciate each and every one of you watching. I hope you found this information helpful. If you did, consider subscribing to the channel, liking this video, and leave me a comment down below. Listen, we'll see you next time on Garage Noise.